Welcome to the RecWired Podcast. I'm delighted today to have as our guest one of our newer members to the RecWired Network, Jeremy Snell, who, amongst other things he does, will talk to us today about the work he's doing from rookie to recruiter. So, Jeremy, for those who don't know you, a little bit of introduction for yourself. How did you end up talking to me today?
Well, trying to keep it brief for you, Andy, and I appreciate being asked onto the podcast today. 60 seconds. I got into recruitment after a spell of working in Ibiza. I came back to the UK. The first job that I got was in recruitment. I spent a long time as a consultant before then becoming a training manager, and now I run my own learning and development consultancy, working with specialist recruiters across the globe, helping them to become more productive. And RecWired was one of those groups where I just felt the synergies between what you did and how we worked as a business meant that we should probably work more closely together.
Fantastic. So, being a recruitment veteran, your LinkedIn profile is very interesting to read. So, my favorite is that you're proud to have worked at Hays when it was a great company, a great specialist firm.
Yeah, completely. Because I wrote that on my profile because as I've got older, clearly things in my past go further back into my past, and I meet people who are perhaps a little younger than I, and they have a different picture as to the organization that is Hays today compared to the creature that I used to work for back in the past. And back in the past, it was, from my perspective, far more entrepreneurial, far more new business orientated, far more that organization where you would really cut your teeth as a 360 consultant, because to an element it was kind of sink or swim, whereas today I think it's seen much more as one of the RPO monsters, and far more of a portal driven, desensitized recruitment platform, rather than being that business that gave me such a great grounding in all of the things that make a good 360 consultant a good consultant. So I kind of felt the need to clarify that in my profile.
I must admit, I get similar actually. People talk about S3, and depending on when they encountered the business, it's, when I joined in late 90s versus probably when I left 3 years ago, completely different businesses, just evolved so much. But I think people have a view of a company at the point of where they either worked for, where they left it, and that doesn't change.
Yeah, exactly. It's like pre-working for Hays, I worked for a company which was called Humana International, and Humana International at the time that I was working there was a real challenger brand to the executive search world, and then it became part of MRI, and as it became part of MRI, it became part of the establishment that it was originally challenging. So again, when you talk about that as an environment, people think about it today as the business that it is, which is the established brand, rather than what life would have been like working there when it was that more angsty, more kind of challenger type of organization. And I think we end up in the same challenge as recruiters, right? You have to deal with people's assumptions and people's preconceptions when you're selling jobs. When you're talking to them about a company that you're recruiting for, they may have a picture of it from 3 years ago, or they may have a picture of it based upon preconceptions from something that somebody else has said to them. So we kind of spend our life often dealing with people's assumptions and premeditated ideas.
Speaking of assumptions, so 10 years in recruitment, you would go and work internally in training. So yeah, alongside going into internal recruitment, that's what anyone who's had 10 years in recruitment does when they're finished with a job. So talk us through that decision. Fall into it or deliberate?
I'm not even sure that at the time I considered it to be a decision. When I go back to that moment, so there was this period of time where I joined this business that was a challenger brand, as I've described MRI and Humana to have been. It was a challenger to the larger accountancy recruitment businesses. It had been started by a qualified accountant who felt that his personal experience meant that he could build a business that was suitably different. I joined because of the story. I joined because of the journey that I could be part of. And what I quite quickly realized was that it had certain growing pains that revolved around hiring good trainees, getting good trainees up to speed to become contributors. I was a regional manager where I spent more of my time meeting new people who were joining the business who didn't stay, rather than actually helping to develop people to get good. And I think I complained about it once too many times, that I was given this mandate. Well, why don't you take the gauntlet and you do this training thing rather than whinging about it? And when somebody puts it to you like that, it's kind of difficult to then say, actually, no, I'm okay. So I didn't really decide to do it. I kind of complained my way into it. And as I did that, I got this new kind of lease of life in terms of what I was doing in recruitment to help to be able to bring people through as rookies through to a program that truly gave them the immersive training and coaching that helped them to be able to get good, to be able to reduce the early attrition that takes place in that first 6 months. So yeah, I guess it was kind of an accident, Andy.
Do you think to be a recruitment trainee you have to have done the job?
Yes. It took me a while to think about that. The answer is yes, because from the outside look, and this is why so many recruitment agencies start often by people who don't have experience, because from the outside looking in, it looks really simple. And when you join recruitment, the mechanics of it are really simple. There is nothing simpler than find a job, find a candidate, introduce them to each other, or find a candidate, find an employer, introduce them to each other. But actually the layers of sophistication that are required to be able to get good at that are often underestimated by people when they join. So a good recruitment trainer is the person who can really start to show those layers of sophistication, and from a more sophisticated perspective, start to show the order within which they need to be implemented so that you can quickly do a more sophisticated job of something that is truly simple. I hope the way that I'm describing that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, the reason I ask is because I think, absolutely like you, a lot of people think it's simple, and it literally is. It's just sales. And I've heard lots of sales trainers say, recruitment's simple. It's just sales, and it's really not. And
No.
and I think for me, the other thing that's really different is that you live especially if you're on contract, you live in both a B2C and a B2B world. And there's not too many jobs where you have to work as both.
No, exactly. And again, I think that it can be oversimplified to start to see that there are customers that are companies that hire, and then to incorrectly define candidates as being the product, when both are as sophisticated as each other as a customer and their expectations. So when you are introducing two buying authorities to each other to be able to appraise suitability and to make sure that they're projecting that they are the one to be chosen as well as the one to make the choice, all of that brings a lot of dynamics to how processes get managed, how expectations are dealt with, and how we get people to feel comfortable sharing things like concerns and potential challenges, as opposed to just the interviews arranged for tomorrow, good luck.
So having done the job a number of years ago and been a trainer for probably longer in your career than you're actually doing the role, what are the big differences now that someone coming into the industry from when we started, in essence? What are the big things? And I know that everyone will say, you send things by email, you send things by message as opposed to fax or post, but actually, what are the big headlines?
I think that the biggest headlines are now the sheer amount of distractions that exist, because there are so many different platforms, so many different nuances as to where we can find people, how we interact with them, so much more choice in terms of channel, so much more choice in terms of media. You can paralyze yourself by getting too hung up on trying to be everywhere at the same time. And when everything starts to become a distraction, it becomes more and more difficult to be able to manage simple things like time. And I think that's probably the most common thing that I hear from people in general in recruitment, is all about feelings of time management issues, fear of missing out. Like if I log in here, then I'm not logged in there. And if I'm not logged in there and my competitor's logged in here, you know, and that whole desire to try and be everywhere all at the same time and create instant wins that just makes you more open to distraction. Because if you don't feel as though you're getting the win where you are, you start thinking about going somewhere else rather than persevering and getting stuff done. So I think a lot of it is purely the noise that exists.
Yeah, I think for me the difference, and I was always a contract recruiter, was that back in the day you used what you had. Now you have to filter what you have, and there's a big difference there because my old boss Mike Smith told me when he started the Huxley contracts divisions, they had 10 CVs on their database of contractors. And literally the database was a filing cabinet, and the guy that could spell Cisco correctly got the next contract, and they just put them in there and said, give it a go. Just say you'll look at the documentation for the first 2 days and hope it all goes well. But it seems to be there's this paralysis now, and it's a very fair point around time. Maybe you didn't have all the job boards, you didn't have LinkedIn, you didn't have all of those things, but you probably actually had a pile of things that you could match and you could do, and that's all you had.
Yeah, because there was more finite resources, i.e. there was less resources available to you. You were either talking to somebody on the phone, or you were putting something in an envelope, or you were opening an envelope. And that was kind of it. So like if I go back to my real early days in recruitment, we did have telephone systems that plugged into call monitoring systems, but in those days, what was considered to be standard would be 5 hours a day on the phone. And when you did your 5 hours of connect time, that was considered to be a metric towards productivity. And I don't necessarily want to get into an argument whether more time on the phone creates more productivity, but in those days, there wasn't a lot of choice. Like if you weren't on the phone, well, what were you doing? Whereas today, those businesses who do have good quality phone systems that in part allows them to see how long people have been on the phone, the majority of people struggle to be able to get past 2 hours a day. And I realize that maybe less people answer the phone, or there's other things that we can do, and there's digital opportunities to be able to do outreach. But if over the course of the time that I've worked in recruitment, the average time on the phone has gone from being 5 hours a day to becoming 90 minutes up to 2 hours, it just indicates just how noisy and how distracting things can be from what seems to be a consensus that this is a relationship orientated world, or at least a sales orientated world, where using the phone has got to become part of the fabric of your outreach process.
And when you're training, is that reflective as well? Because I guess if you're working with someone 15 years ago, it's a very different look and feel to a rookie to recruiter now is completely different.
Totally. And that's the important thing for me, is that what I do today, like if you were to parachute into a training course that I did 5 years ago, the title may be similar, but the content would be very different. And if you were to parachute into the training course that I was doing 15 years ago, the title might be similar, but the content would be really different. So the kind of goals and objectives, the outcomes of a learning event haven't really changed. The vehicle through which you help people to achieve it has changed significantly. Like today I'll deliver a course which revolves around sales, and it will have a lot of reflections on how to be able to get the most out of tools that are designed to increase the quantity of conversations that you could have. So whether that looks like how to craft better quality content on LinkedIn, how to be able to write emails that create inquiries, how to be able to use instant messaging services to be able to capture the attention of people. Just the amount of choice of channels has got to be reflected in what I share. And most importantly for me, what I share needs to have been tested and proven to work in the modern environment, i.e. today, rather than this is what I used to do 20 years ago, and the rote recital of, when I was a boy, this is how I did it, so this is how you should do it too. And I think that there are still plenty of those generals who work in recruitment who are still trying to train people how to fight the last war, and haven't really considered exactly what are we dealing with today. And we're in an attention deficit economy where everything is about capturing attention before you can do anything to be able to inspire trust or to create any form of interaction.
Yeah, there's that lost generation. I mean, I actually probably last recruited at a similar time to you, and then went into management, went into the commercial side of the business as opposed to, you know, mainly the sales side. So I saw an article on LinkedIn the other day, and I think someone's just got fed up with seeing how you should live your life, how you should do this, and basically said, I challenge anyone who is like did it back in the day to start afresh, start their own desk, you know, and what do you think they'd actually build from a cold start? And I was like, yeah, do you know what? As good as I think I probably was, I look at it now and it looks scary.
Yeah, I saw that post too. And I feel confident and comfortable that if out of necessity that was required of me today, then most definitely adopting the things that I know I share and I promote as strategies, they work consistently enough for people with zero contextual understanding that I reckon I'd make a pretty good fist of it. And if the money was right, like if the money was right and somebody said, well, let's do this as an experiment, I'd join in. Like I would enjoy the process of doing it. It's one of the questions I get asked the most by businesses who I've worked with, is particularly after the experience of working with me and seeing the results. It's like, why don't you do this for yourself? Why don't you run your own agency? Because like this stuff that you're sharing, almost with an air of surprise sometimes, like that training worked, right? And I don't have that kind of life that could accommodate what it would truly take to be able to go cold startup as a recruitment agency. And full stop. Not about today's marketplace, just my life path went in a different direction. And although I have the capability, the toolkit, and the skills, I don't have the intrinsic motivation to want to be able to build that thing. And I derive satisfaction from helping other people to be able to do that. You know, having worked with business owners to help them to be able to get to a point where they can sell their business.
Yeah.
You know, it may sound strange. I get an endorphin hit and they get a few million quid.
Yeah, I find that as a consultant, you get your wins vicariously.
Yeah.
And actually, I think obviously seeing where people listen to you and advise and seeing a difference is a major thing. I know for me that, you know, one of the biggest things about working for myself was that actually people value a lot more. You know, if you work for an organization, you've been there 20 years, you have this whole not invented here, well, it can't be anything any good because you work here. So and then, you know, if you're not part of the group think, then, you know, things move on. And that's not me getting at where I've been before. That's just actually, I just find now where you're working with people who don't know you, you've got no limiting beliefs around that as well, and they're open to your question, to your challenge, to your observations.
Yes. But that's the thing, right? They need to be open to it, and that's the beginning of any learning, right? If somebody is closed to the idea of change, or is closed to the idea of something's going to work, then it isn't going to take them anywhere anyway. So I think one of the things that post you're referencing on LinkedIn in particular was saying was, from their perspective, they didn't feel that any of the things that were being shared by learning and development professionals would be relevant for today's market.
Yeah.
And I think the vast majority of the time they might be right. However, I think 100% of the time they are right if their mind is so closed to the fact that anything that anyone else could possibly suggest would make any difference to the results that they're not getting.
Yeah.
And that's a little unfortunate for parts of the world who are a bit too closed off to, there can't be a better way to do this other than my way, and my way doesn't work, so nothing else will work either.
The biggest question I get asked these days, though, is 360 versus 180. And that for me, I mean, you're teaching recruiters and training and coaching recruiters to do both those roles.
Yeah.
What are you seeing at the moment, and what's your view on both?
I don't think it's a question that has a binary answer to say that one is better than the other. I think that one will outperform the other according to the environment and the client base of the recruitment agency. So, for example, some of the businesses that I work with that have very sizable key accounts should quite rightly have sizable delivery teams to be able to feed candidates, talent pool people, build benches on behalf of those companies. So if you're supplying like the NHS with nurses, you would need less business developers to be able to open the right doors with the right decision makers in the right hospitals than you would people to be able to find, interview and clear nurses that you're going to end up placing. So your business developer to resourcer ratio is probably going to be on a 1 to 10 basis. Whereas if you're building a recruitment agency to focus on startups and scale ups within some form of technology, the majority of the product offering, certainly initially in the relationship, is the understanding of the landscape in terms of candidates, what it's going to take to be able to hire good people to help to be able to scale a business. So that business developer, in my opinion, does need to have good quality conversations rooted in talking to a high proportion of the talent pool. So a 360 in that instance is going to be far better, both in terms of client experience, candidate experience, and recruitment agency growth.
One of the things that really comes out in your LinkedIn profile is the enjoyment of work. It comes out, and when we were doing the sort of preamble to this, you're very much right. Recruitment's tough. It's got to be fun as well. Apart from pool tables, free fruit that you're allowed to play on Friday afternoon if you've hit your quota, double, whatever, what should recruitment founders, owners, directors in our network be doing to create a real environment that people want to come and work?
Helping people who join recruitment to really understand the core fundamentals of what it takes to get good, so that they do enough practice early on so that they go through that phase of being a learner to becoming proficient quicker. So the better the quality of the roadmap that the business owner can put in front of somebody to say, these are the key building blocks that will help you to be able to get good. And if you can implement those over this window of time, and you start to arrive at a point of proficiency, that's when we start to have fun doing the job. And helping people to find the gain, right? I think that there is a gain in recruitment. If you get overly hung up on things like KPIs, things like activity, and you start to chase numbers rather than enjoy what you're doing, you'll find it really difficult to be able to hit your numbers. Whereas if you enjoy what you're doing, you found the game that exists inside the mechanics of the job, you accidentally hit KPIs, do the activity that's required to start to give yourself enough practiced opportunities to get good. I think that getting good at recruitment is directly linked to how long you're willing to put up with being shit at it. Right? So if you're not willing to put up with being shit at this job for long enough to get good, you're going to leave. And if you're doing a job that you think is shitty, and therefore you're not enjoying it every day, you're going to turn up in body, but you're not going to turn up in heart and mind. And when you turn up in body and not in heart and mind, you will do activity without believing that it's going to work, and therefore you'll hold yourself back from being authentically you as you do it, because you already doubt its capability to deliver a result. And then when it doesn't work and no one's interested in the job that you've got, or no one wants to give you any vacancies, or no one wants to give you the time of day, you then prove to yourself that you were right, and you can go back to looking for a different job, knowing that recruitment wasn't for you, when actually you probably weren't for recruitment because of the mindset that you walked into it with, because you didn't go out of your way to make sure that you found a way to identify the game that sits inside it, so that you could put up with being shit at it for long enough to get good. That was a really long answer, Andy.
No, it's really, but it's a really good way of looking at it. And what someone once said to me, no one ever fails at recruitment; they just give up. And
Yes.
ultimately, it's a very simple. It's a very simple business, and you're right. You just need to get good at it. You just need to have, I've known £1 million consultants that had 60 final interviews that never got an offer. And then suddenly 2 years on, they're billing £1 million. So it genuinely is those things that change. And then actually, the great thing is you forget that it was shit as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually, and then you just realize that was just part of the journey to getting good. And I was super lucky. I joined a big firm that was definitely on the up. I had friends doing it as well. So it wasn't that you learn this money, I knew what I was getting into. I knew it was tough. I knew that, at weekends they wouldn't come out because they'd go into the office and do it. And actually, so I sort of knew what I was signing up to. I think a lot of people don't know what they're signing up to sometimes.
And sometimes that is the recruitment business's fault, that there's too much assumption in terms of, does this person really know what it's going to take to get good at this? And overselling the dream and the niceties of being in recruitment, without the reality of, this is what the first 6 months is going to feel like for you.
Yeah.
And being a little bit more willing to put it on the line to help people to appreciate it's worth it to go through that to start to arrive at this. And when you have bad day, a bad week, a bad month, and you're holding your pay slip and you've just rocked 10 grand a commission, how you feel about that bad day, bad week, bad month feels really different compared to when you're holding a check that is your basic salary divided by 12.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I go back to my time at Hayes, that was a question that one of my regional directors would ask me, was, what does your basic salary look like divided by 12, Jeremy? I'll be like, well, I'm not really sure. He'd say, well, then you're doing a good job. And there's just that whole, life feels different when you start to be able to look at, what actually am I getting back in a return for the energy that I put into the system? And it's hard to feel that return in the first 3 months, because it's a lot of calories in and not necessarily seeing the reward come back. But every calorie that goes in is being banked, and it is being credited against what your future could look like.
So one of the big things that would have happened in your world, and actually everyone's world, let's be honest, happened in February, March 2020. So COVID comes along. Suddenly everyone moves their business online. And I think you were doing a fair bit online beforehand, weren't you? So was it a case of, you were already set up to go, or did you need to move everything across?
I didn't do anything online before COVID.
Didn't you?
No, nothing. The only way that you would ever see my face would be if you booked me to turn up at your offices to deliver some training. And I spent 4 or 5 days a week delivering face-to-face training, getting on planes, getting on trains, traveling to different locations. So the lockdown was a shock to the system. And yeah, there was a lot of work that had to be done to pivot things really quickly. Purely out of necessity at the start. And then, in fact, one of the first things, lockdown was the 23rd of March in the UK. On the 19th of March, I was in Huddersfield, and I had a phone call from a business that I was due to be with the following day in London, and they said, we're cancelling all training. 6 people have come back from Italy skiing, and they've all got COVID. So the office is going to close. And then on the back of that, I caught up with the businesses I was working with the following week to say, hey, what's your take on this? And over the course of 4 days, every single training confirmation that I had got cancelled from the calendar. So it was like 250, 300,000 pounds worth of business disappeared in the space of 48 hours. So necessity meant do something different, Snell, and do it quickly. So on that day, we registered a URL called recruitinginlockdown.com. So that on the 23rd, when Boris made his announcement, we opened that platform and invited people to join us to get through lockdown together with online training.
I think what was amazing about that time, and there were some amazing things that came out with what is a pretty terrible event in human history, is all of those businesses that just moved on so quickly, just pivoted, just made a difference. And go back to your point earlier, well, if I needed to go and, into a room, build a recruitment desk, my life depended on it, my livelihood depended on it. Everyone had that strong, and I think you either sunk or swum, right? You either just went into a state of paralysis and just hunkered down, or so many people just pivoted, just got on with it, and just completely probably knew what, probably thought, actually, done things they probably put off doing for 5 years.
Yes, totally. Necessity is the mother of invention. And I think some people struggled at that moment because they spent too long in denial. I can remember reading people's updates on LinkedIn, like well-known names in recruitment saying, guys, just sit it out, this will last 2 weeks. And if their advice to their audience was wait, if you'd have waited the 2 weeks and then waited another 2 weeks, you're going to be so behind the pack. It was those who actually took action and did something, whatever it looked like, that I've seen have come out for being much stronger for it. And it was a terrible time and hard events for people to deal with. However, I'm one of, I'm sure, many who would look back at it and have an element of gratitude for the things that I did because of it, rather than gratitude for it happening.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. I mean, I incorporated my business on the 3rd of March 2020, and the amount of people that were like, "4 year," and actually, I was just in the same place as everyone else, but I wasn't carrying any book, any business, and it completely leveled the playing field, and I think it enabled me to think in a different way about starting my business. And also as well, I, like you, was very much of the view of, I don't know how long this is going to go on for. And it was very much a case of, I was actually, when the UK went on lockdown, my wife and kids were in Cape Town, and I didn't get to see them for 8 months.
Wow.
So actually unencumbered by that as well, which probably, people are trying to homeschool children and do that. So it was a different scenario for me, badly emotional because I couldn't see them, but had nothing else to do, to go back to your previous point. And I don't know, without that push, without that fear, whether I'd have got on as quickly and done what I did.
Yeah. Totally feel the same for me as well. That it kind of forced this sense of a hard stop and then begin again. So although I incorporated the business that I run in 2009 during the global financial crisis, now I feel like I'm a startup, despite the fact that I've got 12, 13 years of trading history.
Yeah.
Because everything that I'm doing now is totally different from what I was doing pre-COVID. And I would consider it to be more agile, more valuable for customers, and certainly a far stronger adoption of technology to be able to ensure that real learning takes place rather than what I would consider to be the old school chalk and talk full days in a boardroom with a flip chart.
I was going to say that was going to be my follow-on question. So now you can do both. Okay. So, and the debate rages on. Which side of the fence do you sit on? Do you because you can, one assumes, go either way.
Yeah, and look, I think that we're creatures of comfort, and therefore we might return to the things that we found more comfort in. Where I actually believe that delivery of training in small bite-sized pieces on a little and often basis is far more valuable than taking a full day to then learn 10 pieces of information, to then have to hold on to them for long enough that I can put them into practice tomorrow. And the chances are I'll lose 60% of that content just in terms of memory, let alone opportunity to be able to put things into practice. And that's what I think the world got a little more comfortable with, was the whole idea of online meetings, being able to stay connected whilst being remote from each other, and the power of being able to get more done in smaller windows of time when you get together to be able to collaborate. So I'm a big advocate of online-based learning, because you can access something really quickly, put it into practice, and then go back and access something else really quickly. Like I had a message from somebody the day before yesterday. In fact, it was Friday. So they messaged me on Friday saying, hey, look, I've just done that video that you shared. It was 8 minutes and 43 seconds. And on the back of that, I've picked up an exclusive requirement and booked 3 meetings. They don't have to turn up for a whole day to be able to pick up a new requirement and book 3 meetings in a competitive tech environment. They just need to access the right content at the right time that has got a good quality message in it, and then commit to putting it into practice.
No,
So
that's totally good.
Like as a return on investment, it's not about the cost per se. It's about the allocation of attention and time. And that person invested 9 minutes.
Wow. No, that's impressive. So, Jeremy, if people want to work with you, what does that look like? So, how do they go about finding out? Obviously, I know that you're a member of our network and you're putting together stuff for our members, which is great. But
yes.
in a nutshell, how do they go about an engagement with you?
So the evolution of what I do now looks like rookie-to-recruiter.com. And this is content that will continue to be added to in the forms of modular online-based training that is everything from rookies through to fully fledged recruiters. So the access to materials that sits in there gives people access to video libraries of short burst training, like the 8 minutes and 43 seconds that I referenced before, that is then backed up with more meaningful activities that convert the content of the message into actions and behaviors that you can do in real time to convert knowledge into habit. And then supporting that with weekly coaching initiatives with me, so that there are then opportunities to be able to ask, within the context of somebody's market, how do I interpret this, or what could I do to deal with this situation? So it's a blended learning experience that creates more bandwidth for people to be able to access content when they want, where they want, from wherever they want, and be able to put it into practice really, really quickly. So Rookie to Recruiter is very much the leading kind of product and the future of what my business is looking like.
It's really exciting, and you've been a very welcome addition to the group, and we're looking forward to our members getting lots and lots of benefit from the work you've done. We'll put the links to your products alongside this podcast, and also as well, if I can dig out that LinkedIn post, it would be good as well if we could, if I could get the URL, and I'll share that as well, because it did get me thinking. So, and anything on LinkedIn, it didn't get me commenting, but it got me thinking. So, it was an interesting one. But thank you so much for your time. You're off on holiday shortly, so come back all relaxed, and we'll see you after Easter for the next recruitment sprint.
Awesome. All righty. See you
Take
then.
care. Cheers,
Cheers.
Jeremy.